It's 1969 and the fun, colorful 1960s are almost over. The peace and love generation is fading fast. Vietnam is on the TV every night. Nuclear bombs are pointed at every major city on Earth, and the music world is about to be turned completely upside down. For a band called Deep Purple, things weren't going so great. It had some hit songs in America, covers of Hush and Kentucky Woman, but back home in England, nobody really knew what kind of band they were. The first three albums were all over the place, like somebody threw a bunch of different musical styles into a blender and hit the wrong button. One minute they sounded like a pop group, the next they were trying to sound like a classical orchestra. Fans didn't know what to think. Honestly, neither did the band, and they were drifting, they were lost. And in the music business, if you don't find your sound fast, you disappear. But here's where the story gets interesting. The band made a bold, risky decision. They fired the singer and bassist, the two most visible members of any rock group, and replaced them with two guys from a little-known pop group called Episode 6. The singer's name was Ian Gillan. The bassist was Roger Glover. On paper, it looked like a desperate move. Nobody could have predicted what was about to happen next. The moment Gillan and Glover walked into the room, something shifted. The other band members felt it immediately. It wasn't that these guys were talented, it was something harder to explain. A spark, a sense that everyone in the room suddenly wanted the same thing. Guitar player Ritchie Blackmore, who was already one of the most technically gifted players of his generation, had been quietly frustrated for years. He had riffs in his head that nobody around him seemed to understand. Wild, aggressive, almost violent riffs that didn't fit the polished, pretty music they'd been making. Now, for the first time, he felt like he was surrounded by people who got it. Blackmore wanted to play heavy, really heavy, heavier than the Beatles, heavier than the Rolling Stones, heavier than pretty much anyone making music at that time. And now, finally, he had a band that wanted the same thing. Keyboard player John Lord was just fired up. He spent the last year working on something called the Concerto for Group and Orchestra, a fancy project that mixed rock music with a full classical orchestra. It sounded impressive on paper, but deep down, Lord knew it wasn't working. It felt stiff and lifeless. He wasn't having fun. He wanted to plug in his Hammond organ, crank up the volume, and just play. No rules, no sheet music, no orchestra conductor, nobody telling him what to do. The new lineup had a hunger that the old one never had. And that hunger was about to produce something nobody in the world was ready for. But having the right band is only half the battle. To make a record that actually captures raw, explosive energy, that's a whole different challenge. Most recording studios in 1969 were run by serious, by-the-book engineers who treated music like a science experiment. Everything had to be controlled. Everything had to be clean. The meters on the recording equipment had a red zone, which was the danger zone, and you were absolutely never supposed to let the sound go there. Enter Martin Birch. Birch was young, the same age as band members themselves. He didn't wear a lab coat. He didn't lecture the band about what they could do, what they couldn't do. He walked into the studio, listened to how the band sounded in the room, and made one simple decision. He was going to capture that real sound, the loud, distorted, room-shaking sound that made the walls vibrate and your chest thump. When the recording meters crept into the red zone, Birch didn't back off. He leaned in, he pushed further. Other engineers would have panicked. Birch grinned. He believed that the distortion, the rawness, the sheer volume, that wasn't something to be fixed. That was the music, and he was going to put every single bit of it onto that record, whether the rulebook allowed it or not. The sessions took place across 3 different London studios, IBC, De Leon Lea, and Abbey Road. If you could have been a fly on the wall during those recordings, you could have witnessed something that felt like a studio session and more like a battle. The band played at an intensity that was almost frightening. Blackmore attacked his guitar like he had a personal grudge against it. Lord's Hammond organ screamed and growled. The drummer Ian Pace hit the kit so hard, a wonder the drums didn't fall apart. And Ian Gillan, well, nobody quite knew what Gillan was going to do at any given moment. And this brings us to the most jaw-dropping moment on the entire album. See the line that's drawn. The song is called Child in Time. It runs for over 10 minutes, and it contains what many Music historians consider one of the greatest vocal performances in the history of rock music. Here's something you might not know. The main musical idea in Child of Time wasn't even originally Deep Purple's. It started as a melody from a song called Bombay Calling by a band called It's a Beautiful Day. Lord heard it, loved it, and completely rebuilt it from the ground up into something unrecognizable. It was something bigger and something darker. And then Ian Gillan started to sing. The song begins quietly. Gillan's voice is soft, almost fragile, floating over a gentle organ melody. It feels calm, peaceful. Even if you know what's coming, there's a tension in that calm. Like the few seconds of silence before a thunderstorm hits. And then it hits. Gillan's voice explodes into a scream that doesn't sound human. It soars up into a register that no rock singer had ever reached before. High, piercing, and absolutely ferocious. It wasn't just loud, it was emotional, raw, like someone had opened the door inside him and something massive came pouring out. Band members who were in the studio that day said they stopped playing for a moment because they couldn't believe what they were hearing. Gillan later explained where those lyrics came from. At the time, the Cold War was one of the most dangerous points. The United States and Soviet Union both had enough nuclear weapons to destroy life on Earth many times over. As a young man in the late 1960s, you didn't have to watch a lot of news to feel that threat. It was just there, hanging in the air like a storm cloud that never quite broke. Child in Time was about that feeling, about innocence being crushed by a world that had become too dangerous, too cruel, and too divided. The lyrics came easily, Gillan said, because he didn't have to make anything up. He just wrote down what he felt, and everyone around them all did the same thing. They wrote what they felt. That combination, Gillan's volcanic vocal performance, Blackmore savage guitar, Lord's swirling organ, and the lyrics spoke directly to people's deepest fears. It created something that went far beyond a rock song. It became an anthem. It also became a statement and a 10-minute piece of music that made you feel every bit of the chaos happening in the world outside. The rest of the album was just as powerful. The opening track, Speed King, grabbed you by the collar in the first 5 seconds, and it didn't let go. Gillan stitched together lyrics from early rock legends like Elvis Presley, Little Richard, and Chuck Berry, but he stitched them over a riff so fast and aggressive that it barely resembled anything those artists had ever made. When played live, Speed King stretched to 12 wild minutes, with Gillan screaming and Blackmore's fingers firing across the fretboard at what seemed like physically impossible speed. Then there's Hard Love a Man, a song that music historians still argue about today. Some believe it's the earliest known example of what would later become thrash metal. The guitar riff is mechanical and relentless, like a machine that can't be turned off. The rhythm has this charging, galloping quality that would later become the signature sound of bands like Iron Maiden. In fact, Iron Maiden's iconic gallop rhythm, the one that makes you want to pump your fist in the air, can be traced directly back to this track. The band loved the song so much, they actually dedicated it to Martin Birch, the engineer who helped them sound so ferocious. When Deep Purple and Rock was released in June 1970, the reaction was immediate and massive. The album cover turned heads before anyone even heard a single note. 5 band members' faces carved into a mountain, just like the presidents on Mount Rushmore. It was bold, it was cocky, and it worked. The album shot up the UK charts and stayed there for 68 straight weeks, peaking at number 4. But chart numbers don't tell the whole story. The real impact of In Rock was felt over the decades that followed. Martin Birch carried everything he learned in those London studios with him and went on to produce landmark albums for Iron Maiden and Black Sabbath, shaping the sound of heavy metal through the 1980s. The screaming vocal style that Ian Gillan pioneered became the template for generations of singers. The monster riffs Ritchie Blackmore built became the blueprint for countless guitarists around the world. If you've ever felt a chill run down your spine listening to a massive guitar riff, If you've ever felt your heart race during a screaming high note, there's a very good chance that what you're feeling has its roots in a London recording studio in 1969, where 5 young men decided to throw out the rulebook and turn everything up as loud as it would go. Deep Purple in rock didn't just save a struggling band's career, it built a foundation that heavy metal still stands on today. It was the moment Deep Purple stopped searching for who they were and became legends. Check out this playlist with more Deep Purple album reviews. I will be adding them as I make them. Please like this video, helps me with the YouTube algorithm. Please subscribe if you're not already. I do rock and metal reviews, rankings, and more. Thanks for watching. I will see you in the next one.